Let me briefly speak about the experience from Serbia. We started the discussion about greening the expenditure cycle, as you mentioned in your introduction, 2-3 years ago, and it was very novel at the time. Where Serbia is a small upper middle income economy with a per capita income last year of 9,251 US dollars per capita. It's an EU accession country since 2014, so that's a very important pull also in the direction of environmental standards and addressing climate change. But again, it's still at a preliminary stage. And as I'll show you in a moment, Serbia really has quite high CO2 emissions relative to its GDP. That's related a lot to its energy sector and steel production, as well as sort of general, if you want, inefficiency in how energy is produced, transmitted, and utilized. And it has also significant other environmental and green economy challenges, especially very high air pollution, which is across the Western Balkan regions, and then issues with sewage coverage, solid waste management, and so on. So there's other key environmental issues that are relevant for citizens. This chart shows you the carbon intensity of the economy. So while this has come down since the mid-2000s, it's still substantially higher than the EU average, and also other countries of the former Yugoslavia, Croatia, and Slovenia. And sort of in recent years, it started also to level off rather than to reduce further. It's about 20% of the Serbian power is produced through renewable sources. The rest is produced from domestic lignite, so it's coal powered primarily. What we see, we had an opportunity to do some survey work in recent months. So there is significant concern about climate change. About 85% of respondents expressed that concern. And we did 2 cycles, so it's fairly stable. For a long time, policymakers didn't see this as so essential, right? The growth and economic recovery and job creation was a far more dominant issue. But we now see this shift to really greater attention to environment and climate from citizens and also at the political level. So Serbia just has a new government since earlier in November. And for the first time, environment and climate is one of the top 5 policy priorities that the government has set out at the beginning of its mandate. Again, this shows the perception of pollution trends. So the question here was whether pollution has gotten worse over the past 5 years. And well, while there is a bit of a difference between the 2 survey rounds, one was in late 21, one was in early 22. Overall, it does show a high level of concern. And interesting also, we did a gender breakdown. That concern is even stronger among females than among male respondents, what you see on the right-hand side. So as we mentioned, there is evolving government commitment. There was a regional green agenda adopted in 2020 to 2021, also linked to the green recovery from the COVID pandemic. And then Serbia issued its first green bonds in 2021. And as I set out, this now for the first time, we also see it as a top government priority for this new government. So it's really a journey that has accelerated in the most recent years. And it's a very interesting moment for us to then say, well, how can we provide support, right, to go from these policy commitment that's emerging, that's new, to actually putting things into practice, to actually changing and enhancing how Serbia manages its public finances. So on our operational engagement started with early discussions in 2020, and it was also linked to some analytic work that we started at the time on the green transition, on environmental issues, on green growth opportunities. And then we started also talking about the possibility of doing green budget tagging and what the emerging experience is in that regard among the EU member states. And at that time, it was all very new. So the Ministry of Finance was more inclined to say, well, those are really issues you should be discussing with the Ministry of Environmental Protection. And it's not something that we consider as being part of our competency and domain. And that really evolved over the course of the last 2 years with two elements. So one of the Ministry of Finance really understanding that it does have a critical role to play in considering what could be green criteria and how to leverage the importance of public expenditures to support this sort of overall critical challenge and agenda. And at the same time, also developing more collaboration across the key ministries. So between finance and environmental protection, as well as finance and Ministry of Mining and Economy on the energy efficiency agenda to really think through, okay, well, what are the criteria that we can use and what are the areas of opportunity? Of course, overlaid by the bigger picture political commitments that are also evolving. So here you see, this is how we are designing our support for Serbia. So there is both a policy operation that's going to support a set of legal changes as well as regulatory changes. And then we have a program for results that will help over a period of 4 years to really implement some of these new provisions. So the first element is to look at green and climate aware planning. So if we want to shift some of the public investments and generally of fiscal allocations to climate priorities, both on the mitigation and on the adaptation side, this needs to be anchored at the planning stage. So we'll be working with the Public Policy Secretariat that works with at the planning stage with different line ministries. And then the second aspect is really bringing green criteria into the preparation and selection of public investments, of capital projects. So that's a second element of our support. And then the third one is the annual budgeting and this introduction of green budget tagging, not so much as a, as an end in itself, but in order to make it visible in the budget and to be able to have both trade-off discussions about trade-offs among different potential green and climate sensitive expenditures, and also how that should what the trade-offs are with other types of expenditures, both including, so if you want, neutral spending on key priorities such as health and education, and ultimately also trade-offs with brown expenditures such as subsidies for fossil fuel that favor fossil fuel consumption. Then we come to the procurement stage. So we want to support the rollout of already existing green public procurement guidelines, and then to the reporting and risk treatment side, where we are supporting Serbia already for a while to enhance its fiscal risk management. So Serbia has experienced a round of massive floods back in 2014, and it continues to be at risk of more significant flooding as climate change consequences deepen. Just to briefly outline also that we have these two operations, the policy operation, again, targeting the legal changes, and then this program for results targeting the implementation over time. And these two are complementing each other, but working with a number of the same ministries and institutions. And if useful, I can talk a little bit more about this. We are currently targeting for this operational support to be finalized and approved both by our board and by then ultimately also by the National Assembly in Serbia early next year. And then we look forward to that implementation period. And this will already create initial provisions of around the prioritization of the public investments within the public investment space, so for the capital budget. But then we know, right, it's not enough to simply put something into a budget system law. We really need to pay attention and follow up and see how we can make this happen in a step-by-step way, and also to strengthen and support how government relates with citizens on this agenda. So citizens have voiced an increasing demand and expectation, but right now it's very hard for citizens to know how much effort the government is already making, because there is not a sort of summary reporting of what is being done. So that's another element of what we are expecting to support. Let me hand to Wei-Jen to come in from the environmental perspective, and it's really been a very productive collaboration between different specialisms. So it's not just that we're supporting this on the client side to happen more, this interministerial collaboration, but we also, to do this well, we also need the same on the World Bank team side.
Thanks, Verena. Am I all? Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. So just quickly to say that indeed it was really important for expertise from both sides of the houses to be working together on this operation. For me, having worked in different parts of the expenditure cycle and in different regions, Serbia was a particularly interesting and important case for me. Many of you, I think especially in the East Asia region, would be familiar with some of the work the bank has done in introducing some form of expenditure classification and tagging and budget tagging in Indonesia and the Philippines and including in Vietnam. And as well, if you look at the overall expenditure cycle, there's also, at the downstream end where you think about the financing framework. And I've been involved in some work on taxonomies for green frameworks, green bonds. So why I say Serbia is particularly interesting is it's one of the first opportunities we are getting to try and introduce green and climate considerations over the entire cycle. That's important. And I believe the reason we were able to get there is Serbia meets a lot of the preconditions for doing so. Verena mentioned that the country has got a clear objective when it signed up to implementing the green agenda. But that by itself is just a set of targets, right? It's well supported by a body of strategies and laws, climate change law, they've got a national air quality program, long-term decarbonization strategy, etc. So that's all there. The part that was most interesting, at least for me, is the opportunity to introduce green and climate criteria into the project, into the public investment management cycle, the PIM system. And again, here Serbia meets a lot of the preconditions. It's got a fairly well-established PIM law. The structure is there. The law stipulates certain discrete stages: identification, pre-screening, appraisal, selection. It's fairly well understood legislation. There's a standing committee, a capital investment committee that looks at the final selection. So, when you look at this, all the entry points already present themselves to you in terms of introducing additional criteria to try and pick up a few additional steps so that they can then start making a more conscious decision on how to select public investments. So I guess, if anything, the lesson that for me is that if you've got very clear and important priority you want to go that's green and climate change related, you of course look at all your tools of government to help you get there, and laying the foundation in terms of the strategies and including the bylaws and regulations that would support the strategies is really important. Having and in the case of Serbia, they've already evolved towards a more program-based kind of a budgeting system. The financial management system is almost fully integrated. So that all helps with the traceability of expenditures and reporting. And I'd also say that their foray into issuing green bonds gave them a really good understanding, because they're accessing the capital markets, gave them good understanding of the kinds of indicators that they need to watch out for when they have to do investor reporting as part of the bond framework. That would also mean that when it comes to asking themselves the question of, how do I review the performance of some of these so-called green and climate budget programs, they already have an idea of some of the indicators, because they've been through the green bond process. So all these things really help them get to where they are, I think, and this is an extremely exciting project, and a very effective cooperation between my practice in environment and yours in governance, GP. I'm happy to go into other lessons learned if there is time, but this is just my main message would be, let's not overlook the importance of strategies, bylaws, regulations, including those covering public investment management. There's a lot of value in understanding what, investors want in a green bond framework, because it forces you to think about how you measure your own performance of cross-cutting programs like climate change and green programs in terms of indicators, and having a good solid foundation in a PEM structure and a prioritization process always help when you want to introduce additional green criteria. I'll stop now. Thank you.